context here, there is a little bit of a behind the scenes chat with some of the other coaches that talk about ecological dynamics. And over the last 2 weeks, I have been talking with so many people. Like I've had at least 2 meetings per day for about 2 weeks now. A lot of them with different people, various things. And the other day, I was on a call and we were talking about memory, remembering, and thinking, and all that fun stuff when we take an ecological approach to it. And I wanted to ask you, John, an interesting question to start with. How is remembering different from perceiving?
I don't know whether it is. Because the instant reaction would be, well, it's in the past, but then, yeah, even that's a problem. Because
Why
it's
is that a
not.
problem?
Well, it's inaccurate. Because when I am remembering something, I'm perceiving something in the environment which affords me to find that information, attune to that information
Should they
that I
find it?
attuned to
What is
previously.
it stored?
Yeah, it's stored. It is stored. Did you not know that? Stored.
So the remembering, when we talk about remembering and we talk about memory, I think the first thing to say here is when we talk about, or when I talk about memory as a topic of conversation, I'm not talking about something stored in our brains. I'm not talking about that. I'm also not talking about a mind or a entity that isn't me collecting information from the past at some point. I'm talking about myself using detected information,
Yes.
specifying information. Now, when it comes to the past, the present, and the future, this is where I think fractals become increasingly important in the conversation. So, fractals, for those unfamiliar, is essentially how big your measuring stick is. That's the easiest way I could explain it. When you're measuring something, you can measure it with a meter, with a 10 centimeter, with a millimeter, with a nanometer. And if you've got a meter stick and you're measuring a bumpy wall that's a meter, it's going to be 1 meter. If you're measuring 10 centimeters, well, now the 10 centimeters you can't just put the 10 centimeters across. And when you do, it might go down a little bit or up a little bit, depending on where the wall goes. So it might actually be longer than 1 meter because you've got the 10 centimeters to add bits on top. And then the same thing would happen. For those really interested, look at videos about measuring the coastline of Britain. That's a popular example. So when we say past, present, and future, it's separated into fractals because you could be as long or as short as you want with your stick.
Yeah.
So where is past? And that question I don't think is accurate. Where is the past? Where does the past start? Because the past, this is going to sound confusing. To me, the past is the future.
Yeah. So it kind of, because an example that my other half was talking about was like the forgetting, because something's in the past, it's forgotten. It's like, yeah, but you've forgotten something. So how have you forgotten? And two, and then from there, they were saying, oh, well, how is it that if I remember something or I'm thinking about something, I then do, and they asked, do you go back through your like doom scrolling, whatever you want to call it, through your phone, and then you're able to you're re-remembering it again? I'm like, yeah, because but that happened in the past and you're repeating that thing. So is it the past or is it actually the current future, the now happening all of the time?
And that to me is where I come up with the question that I didn't ask in the call because it was coming towards the end of the call, and I'm like, I don't want to start this conversation. But when we talk about remembering something that happened in the past, this brings back the question of existence. How do you know it happened? Because whether you're from ecological psychology or cognitive psychology, you say something happened. But how do you know it happened? Because both approaches suggest that we are reconstructing something. We are reconstructing an event. So if you're reconstructing it, it's not the same. And if you're reconstructing it, how do you know it happened and you didn't just think it happened? because that's what some people struggle with. Some of the disorders are people think they've done something, but they haven't done something. So they are remembering incorrectly, but they're not remembering an event because both approaches, cognitive psychology and ecological psychology, both suggest that we are reconstructing information. So we are reconstructing something that might not have happened. So how do we know if something happened if we don't already know that something's happened? And this, to me, brings back the ideas of loans of intelligence. How do you know what happened if you don't already know what happened? This is the probability problems. And from an ecological approach, we don't need loans of intelligence. We are directly perceiving. And if we are directly perceiving, then we don't need someone to help us with things that have happened in the past. And this is a struggle for both approaches, ecological psychology and cognitive psychology. If we are remembering something that happened, how do we know that thing happened? Directly perceiving, we don't need a central executive because we've perceived it. But indirect perception is, well, it needs to be stored somewhere, but how do we then retrieve it if we don't know how to retrieve it? Or the central executive knows, but how does it know? So but both approaches have different problems. One problem is how does it know where to find it, how to retrieve it, how to construct it to make it accurate at all, because you need loans of intelligence from this thing that doesn't really exist because we think that it exists. Or we are remembering, we are reconstructing, but are we reconstructing this memory of an event that we think happened, but we don't know? We can't prove it happened unless we have the exact information. We would need that exact situation to prove it happened, i.e., video,
Yeah.
which is not memory. Like it's not remembering, it's not memory to me, because you are now perceiving a new, unique situation,
Yeah.
which to me results in two ways of thinking. Either we are never remembering, we are perceiving, and we are perceiving through timescales. So memory isn't a thing, which sounds extremely radical. Or we are remembering, but we require external help to confirm what we've remembered, i.e., video. But that then takes it out of human organism capabilities because video is technology and technology is niche construction. Niche construction is not what happens in the organism, it's organism environment relationship, which therefore means it's perceiving through the assistance of technology, which means it's still perception, not remembering, but it's perception with the assistance of other environmental tools, i.e., technology. So the way I would think about remembering is perceiving through niche construction, or with the assistance of niche construction.
Yeah. Perceiving is kind of it, which is quite cool.
Cool, but scary.
Yeah. Because
Because
that's
when
been something, there's a lot going on. And so forgetting things is a thing or is an assumption. And so a lot of the time, everyone that speaks to me going, I've been forgetting, I'm forgetting what I'm doing, I'm forgetting this, I'm forgetting that. And so for me, I was like, okay, cool, right. Well, forgetting it's got so many assumptions for myself. But I found myself using that language still. I'm like, yeah, but am I forgetting? Okay, let's assume that I need to perceive it. If I'm perceiving it, let's perceive and like attune to the information again that's there and see what happens. And most of the time, I remembered.
mm, see, this is the thing. Language. Human language
Yeah,
has
the
obviously,
language is really hard right now.
because when you look at any, this is something that I've struggled with. Any grammar spelling correction tools, when I'm typing inside of Obsidian, I'm fine because it doesn't tell me, hey, this is wrong, that's wrong. But as soon as I go on the internet, I have Grammarly. And Grammarly underlines almost everything I write when I'm speaking ecologically because it's like, that's not right, because it has a different meaning for the words. So
Mm.
if we were to substitute remembering for perceiving, it would come up with a red, blue, purple line and say, nope, that's not right. And it would correct my language because it doesn't think the same, think about the same meanings of the words. So if I was to say, well, I'm not perceiving that right now, instead of remembering that, it would be telling me you're wrong. So the grammar tools, the AI tools, the niche construction we've created to assist our language is constraining our language from an ecological approach. And this is something that happened in the conversation when researchers talk about remembering and memory from an ecological approach. They talk about remembering and memory.
Mm,
That's how they package it. And that's how the experts, those people with expertise that have been researching this for a long time, that's how they talk about it. Remembering from the ecological approach. But is it remembering from the ecological approach? Or is it just perceiving through timescales? And if it's perceiving through timescales, then remembering is a redundant term. And
mm.
remembering, I would argue, is the same as the central executive.
Oh, I mean, yes, yes,
It's a placement of something because we don't know what the something is. So we're using it to describe things that we don't know. Remembering as a process, yes, I can understand that. But when you describe what remembering as a process is, what is remembering? It's perceiving through
yeah,
time
yeah.
because perception is consistent. Perception is consistently dynamic between the organism environment relationship. And when we talk about remembering, we are selecting a time scale, we're selecting a measuring stick and slapping it on our perception. We're saying, I want to remember this many hours back, or I want to remember this many days back, this many weeks back. You take a
I want to
measuring stick.
perceive this many days back.
Yeah. But the problem with that is, using a practical example from the conversation that we were having, hi David, he gave an example of a training session. I believe it was football, and they were saying, you remembered what we did last week, or you remembered what we did on Wednesday. So the measuring stick, say it's Friday and the training session was Wednesday, or say match was Sunday, that's more appropriate to football. You play the match on a Sunday, you train on whatever day in the week, so Wednesday. On Sunday, oh yeah, you remembered what we did at training on Wednesday. Did they? Because your fractal measuring stick right there is a few days. But what they did on Wednesday is also, because of non-obvious causality and the fractality of the way that we perceive through dynamic relationships in the world, started before birth. So actually, if you look at yeah, if you look at all of the ways that we have perceived, it is related to things non-obvious causality. It's related to things before Wednesday.
Yeah,
So them learning to move started obviously when they were born. So them learning to do all of those things is related to what they did on Sunday and what they did on Wednesday and what they did on Tuesday before Wednesday and Thursday, Friday and Saturday, because all of the moving is them perceiving and it being in some way causally related to their actions on Sunday. So when we say, oh, you remembered what you did on Wednesday, that to me is more of a linear correlation, linear causality directed at behavior. Because, oh, what happened on Wednesday changed what happened on Sunday. A causes B. But if we are taking a truly ecological approach and we're not looking at linear causality and we're looking at non-linear, non-obvious causality, well, then you've got non-linear actions that happened throughout the week. So after Wednesday, they did things maybe climbing up the stairs or catching a ball or running through somewhere that has similar action capabilities to what they did on Wednesday. Well, now what happened on Sunday might be something that happened at home or at school or out with friends. Training session wasn't the cause. The training session was a cause, but not the cause because multi-causality. But then of course there's non-obvious causality as well in there, which could be something that no one is aware of. An example of non-obvious causality that I used inside of the video essay that I published on the channel is when a bird breaks out of an egg, if they twist to the left, they become left-footed. If they twist to the right, they become right-footed. Well, they are right-footed, they are left-footed, and you can condition that. So in a lab, you can condition the bird to twist left out, and then they're just left-footed. Why? I don't know. But it's non-obvious causality. If you want to have a look, go look at the video, and I put a reference in there. And there are loads of other examples of non-obvious causality. And this is fractals explaining the math behind the variation in the world. So to come back to memory and remembering, oh, you did that because of what we did on Wednesday. No, that's a linear explanation of causality. Did it have an important impact? Likely. It is likely. But just because it's a big leg of the table doesn't mean the other legs aren't there, and the other legs, if they weren't there, maybe the behavior doesn't emerge. So do we want to put a big leg in? Yes, underneath the table. But if the other legs aren't there, then the behavior may not emerge. But you don't have, as the coach, control over all those other legs, which is why I think when I'm discussing this, as individuals, we can, as environments for people to, we can guide, we can encourage certain legs to be planted as they develop skills. But even with all the training in the world, constraints-led approach to coaching and allowing for all the different skills to emerge, if the other causes aren't there, the behavior that the desired behavior you're, as the coach, looking for through a goal may not emerge because those other non-obvious causes are not there. So it's not, oh, you weren't listening at training. Maybe they just haven't done some practice that's helped them attune to the information that you are not in control of. And when we think about neurodiverse individuals, those non-obvious causes may be different because of the attractor field, their attractor field being uniquely different, and the width, depth, height, and color of the attractors being so varied.
Yeah, it's really interesting to have that conversation around like the neurodiverse interpretation, like experience through an ecological lens, because it's like everything. What if we strip back all of the traditional cognitive approach, all of the traditional cognitive approach? It's like, so what is there? Because there is something there. Otherwise, there would be no correlation between multiple different people. Like it just wouldn't exist. Because when we were having that on the trip to Berlin, I was like, oh, okay. So well, it doesn't. It was a very like open and shut conversation, which was like, yeah, but I see that, but there is still a lived experience. So
I understand that. No, I see that. That's the way I would explain it, because you said I see that.
yeah, I understand that. Yeah, I understand that, but there is a lived experience which now does not have necessarily um a causality. There is no causality or explanation for why.
There's no linear causality. There's no start.
Yeah, there is no. Yeah, there wasn't in that conversation.
Because they don't assume linear causality. Because I mean, I assume you're aware, but for those unaware, when you're talking to someone like that has beliefs, they assume their beliefs in conversation. So if you have different assumptions to start with, what you think is a problem, they don't see as a problem because they are coming from different assumptions. So when you say, "Oh, it just happened. It's a thing," I'm like, well, yes, it's a thing because that's their assumption. They assume affordances. So if you're assuming that, you're assuming direct perception, you're assuming multi-causality, you're assuming no central executive. If you still assume a central executive or you still assume linear causality, you're missing something. And that's where cognitive psychology, the approaches from cognitive psychology go, oh, but there's a problem with that. And there's only a problem with that if you follow those assumptions. So the way I would describe the situation that you're in, or that you were in there, is you followed assumptions of linear causality and
Yeah.
the central executive through the explanations you were looking for. But because the ecological psychologists don't believe in either of those things, there's no explanation for them to give for you because you're talking in a
Yeah.
different context.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's like you saying, okay, if I have an apple and a banana, does that equal an orange? And all humans are looking at you going, what are you on about? Like, they're completely different fruits. You can't put them together. Like, you can do one add one equals two. So maybe the orange is the same as two, but now you're talking maths and not fruit. And that's essentially what happens in the conversations when you get cognitive psychologists and ecological psychologists talking about similar topics. One of them is talking about apples and bananas, and the other one's talking about numbers.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when we talk about remembering and memory, I feel like those words could be doing the same thing. And I've done the same thing. This is a
Mm.
reflection from my video essay when I said we're always remembering. And Jeff questioned that. Was like, I'm not so sure about that. And the more I thought about it, the more I don't necessarily I don't disagree with Jeff. I don't agree with Jeff. I'm thinking in a similar way
Mm.
because when I'm speaking with a cognitive psychologist and when I'm speaking with people that don't have the same language as me, I would still use I'm remembering all of the time because it's something for them to grasp onto. But for me, the meaning is, well, no, I'm just perceiving through timescales.
Yeah.
So my question for language is how do we shift language to be more ecologically valid when it comes to the approach? Because ecological psychologists are very precious about their language.
We?
We don't, I don't think there are many ecological psychologists that would throw words out there to try and explain topics. Working memory, cognitive load theory, memory, remembering, schema, motor program, command. There's so many different words for very similar things. Cognitive load, epistemic memory. How many different types of memory are there? Whereas I think this happened in a Discord conversation that you joined in on. When you explain something through an ecological approach, there are far less words.
Yeah. It always come. I'm finding myself just using perceive more often.
But even just constraints and affordances. Oh,
Yeah, it's most of the time I'm saying constraints, affordances, perception, or language around that. Those are the three I'm just always using when and that's about it. And even when I use, I suppose, see, I mean perceive. I very rarely mean see.
and this is where I feel language can be really, because essentially language is coordination with others. And if language is coordination with others, we can use language to be in sync or anti-sync, out of sync. And I feel that a lot of language is it doesn't encourage synchronized coordination. It encourages anti-synchronized coordination, which is still coordination, but it doesn't necessarily lead to the same end.
Mm,
So if we're going to use language to try and coordinate behavior in the same or similar direction, we would want to use language that everyone understands. But cognitive psychology doesn't use language everyone understands because words, we perceive affordances with words because meanings are in the relationship between the organism environment relationship. Therefore, each word is going to mean something different for each person.
yeah,
But the invariants surrounding the words and terms used allow for us to direct whatever behavior it is towards the goal.
yeah,
That's the way I think about it. So when we say remember, and when we say memory, and when we say perceive, for me, they mean drastically different things to a cognitive psychologist. And they will also mean
yeah,
drastically different things to you. But both of us, I feel, are coordinated in a way that we can go in a direction somewhat similar.
yeah.
Whereas a cognitive psychologist, unfamiliar with the way that we understand the word perceive, wouldn't.
They default to see, or whenever people say see, all I'm hearing is their eyes looking. That's what they mean. But then again, maybe they don't.
I feel like it's a sense. Like we
Yeah,
sense information. Like that's how I feel those individuals that are cognitive psychologists would perceive the word perceive. Oh, I'm sensing information, which isn't
yes.
inaccurate.
Yeah, I had that reply. I sent an email about, oh, I think it was related to this topic in some way, shape, or form, somehow. Um,
Non-obvious.
yeah. And the response was, oh yeah, I get this as like a gut feeling. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, you're not wrong, because gut feeling, a sense,
But what's a
but
gut feeling?
well, sensing the environment,
Which is what?
perceiving. I know. But it was interesting, like we came to the same kind of conclusion, as it will. I don't like that word.
If
Same
you
to a
if you
claim.
if you put your measuring stick on it, then you've got a
Yeah, if
conclusion to
there's
the
a measuring stick
measuring
on it, then it's
stick.
a conclusion. But came to the same kind of output, if you will, as each other, just using slightly different language, which was interesting. I'm like, okay, okay.
So you both did you start disagreeing and then you both became in sync or attuned to similar information?
I don't know.
I would imagine if there
Quite
was agreement in
possibly.
the conversation, then you started thinking similarly. And yeah,
Yeah.
in other words, there was I guess, a synergy of coordination between the language you were using. Because that's what's happening in a conversation, I think. The way I would describe a conversation is there is synergy in the coordination of words, i.e., behavior. So our behavior is synchronized because
Yeah.
you talk, I talk, and those words are related. Our behaviors are related. Like when you're playing football, someone running on the left side of the field is going to be related to someone running on the right side of the field, related to the opponents. It's coordinated, and the words we use, the behaviors we use, are coordinated in this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the coordination of the conversation became more in sync.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I feel like this is where um people can like accuse, say, you're getting too much into the weeds, etc., etc. But this is where, again, using a conversation that I had with, what was it, four or five of us, whatever it was, the conversation, and thinking about the conversation, there was a question that, I mean, I think about a lot is what's the point? What's the point of talking about all this? Because you're not going to go, or I don't think you're going to go to a 5-year-old football player and say, hey, your timescale perception isn't quite accurate because of the attractors that you're perceiving right now. No, you probably wouldn't use the same terminology because it's not useful information for those individuals at that time in that situation. So what's the point of us talking about this stuff? And I'm gonna ask that question to you. What is the point of us talking about this stuff?
I would say understanding.
Hmm?
Like for me, because a lot of doing in my day to day um doesn't use all of the highly deep, like in the weeds. Excuse me. Doesn't necessarily use in the weeds. Then again, that assumes that there is a depth.
Hmm. You've got your measuring stick out.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm going to use that. I like the analogy of the
yeah.
measuring stick.
That assumes there's a depth when really if the information is there, is there depth or is it just there?
This funny comes back to depth perception in visual systems. How do you perceive depth in visual systems? Well, there's two explanations. Ecologically, we don't perceive depth because space doesn't have depth.
It doesn't really, yeah. That's the, does it,
Because we're perceiving the optic flow in visual systems. We're perceiving optic flow and perceiving texture change. If a ball there comes closer, there is a change. There is a change in the
mm,
optic flow. There is a texture change. There's a drop off of surfaces because the drop off is going to change. Is it covering my nose? Well, it's covering my whole nose as I come out. Now it's covering like my face rather than just my nose. So there is a texture change, and that's depth perception. You're perceiving the texture of the surface texture and optic flow. So when we're talking about depth of understanding, it's similar. The amount of information, specifying information to be specific, that's being, because we're detecting it, but we are
mm,
using it,
yeah.
which is why the Feynman technique's a load of bullshit.
No, Feynman technique. Amazing.
So
I love the Feynman technique.
I had to put that in there. I've seen so many mini essays, atomic notes, Feynman technique
Oh, trust me,
videos.
I know. I just stop
I've
looking.
I've got mine. I've got mine queued up. It's ready to go out there. To be the contrarian that I am.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so depth, I think as soon as you assume a depth, which is getting your measuring stick out, you are constraining what it is that you are looking at. And
Yeah.
when I say looking at, I mean like because I don't think perceiving is an accurate term there in that context. Again, this is me challenging my language because I'm looking at a measuring stick. I'm
Yeah.
I'm looking at a moment or a
It's the snapshot
section.
kind of thing again, isn't it? The
Yeah,
moment
it's
the
like I'm
measuring
looking at a
stick comes
picture.
out, yeah, with the moment the measuring stick comes out, you can't measure a moving thing, a thing that is constant. Like,
You can't measure what's not in the picture.
yeah.
So
And so,
I'm looking at the picture. I'm not
yeah,
perceiving because I've got my measuring stick out and I've taken my picture with all my angles.
yeah, yeah. You've taken the screenshot. Now it's time to go and analyze that screenshot.
Exactly. So when I say looking at, that's yeah, I like that.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And so if we put the measuring stick away, is it almost the wrong, an inaccurate question
Which question are we discussing?
to say like, what's the point? Because obviously the answer to that one is hidden, because it always is, because we're not. But it's as if there is an assumption of like, what is the point of this? What is the point of this thing, this static point in time, versus what is the point in this? It's ever evolving, it's ever changing, it's ever moving. It doesn't really, because once you start, what's the point of this? Well, it depends on the environment that you are in. When it's a conversation between people who have an understanding, it the point is to explore it, ask the questions. Do you bring that to your 9-year-old football group? No,
Do you discuss it with your son while they're doing something on the sofa? Probably not.
no. But also that a lot of, yeah, probably not.
Hi, do you want to talk about some perceiving fractal attractor states today? No.
I gen I just I like asking the questions,
I like
you
that
know.
question though. Like, because what is the point? Makes makes you question the measuring sticks that you're
Mm.
using
Yeah.
because other related questions are going to be, well, how do I use this? Obviously, it depends. What do I do with this? Obviously, it depends.
Because
If
because I've been reading the ecological psychology, the Cambridge one. That
Vicente and Miguel's.
yes.
Is it Miguel and
It,
Vicente or is it Vicente and Miguel? I don't know who the first author is.
I don't know.
Apologies if you're listening, whoever first author is.
Yeah, sorry. Um, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. But it always goes back. The most, I suppose, highlighted part for me is always going back to that perception, affordances, like those pieces, like are the bits that I'm like, oh yeah, those are the things I keep returning to. Yes, tractor states and this and that and diving deeper and all of this stuff is cool, like going down to the fractals and everything. But we perceive for action. Just that. Just but yeah, let's make that a point. Like that there, I think is for me anyway, and from my experience, that there is the big one. That there is the like, oh, that does change everything. And everything else that we talk about is if you wish to put a measuring stick on it, is going into the weeds. But also it's following those little tiny edge cases, the little okay, cool, but what about this and what about that? And how do we explain that? And how do we it's almost it's just more of.
What I'm thinking at the moment is that when you ask what is the point, that question has a measuring stick on it. There is
Yeah.
a scale at which you are measuring the benefit, the usefulness of information. And as a content creator online, it is obviously a important question. What is the point of this video? And that's that's how I assess like whether something's going to be a video topic because a lot of people are looking for a point. They are looking for a measure. And when we look at anything, there is always going to be a point at which it's being measured, because there is an assessment, where there is constant assessment of whether something is useful or not at that person in that situation. And I guess my question about the question of what is the point would be, why do you need a point? Like, what would the desired... This is something that I was thinking about when I was at trampoline yesterday. The coaches gave lots of feedback. They gave lots of instructive feedback. You need to do X, Y, Z. You need to stop doing X, Y, Z. You need to do this thing. And I could see that as soon as the participants stopped bouncing, they just turned, looked at the coach, and their brain just shut off. Like, that's the explanation most coaches would use. Yeah, I know, I used it deliberately. Their brain would shut off. But the thing is, looking at them, their brain doesn't shut off. What it does is it's perceiving the information, but there isn't a point to the information that's being shared. You need to do loads of words, and the person doesn't shut off their brain. It doesn't stop. But the reason I think that's used as an explanation is because what they then do doesn't necessarily represent what was said. So they don't use the information that's detected. So it's not they're turning their brain off, it's the exposure of information hasn't been useful to them in the immediate term. And that is where I feel that the question of the point comes in. It's like, okay, so why are we explaining things? Why are we exploring things if there isn't an obvious point?
Learning.
Oh, yeah, experiences. And for me, it comes back to desirable difficulty, right? If there is desirable difficulty in an environment, then an individual is more likely to be able to use the information in an effective way to affect their education of intention and attention for the behavior, calibration of learning. So to answer David's question, what is the point of talking about this? Is to educate our intention and attention of behavior towards educating individuals, to the behaviors directed towards a suggested goal or outcome. But that, to me, is in itself measured.
Yeah.
What does success look like for you at the next training session using the information that you detected in this conversation? Do you want to be able to say, okay, I'm going to use this idea and this concept in that drill, and then those players are going to do this thing. Now I have success. Like, how do you measure successful uses of the information from a conversation? I think.
Because then if you
is
do
whether-
that assumes that there is a correct way,
Precisely.
which is a little bit of, yeah.
Because there's not a correct way to use the information from the conversation. So you can't measure whether it's successful or not unless you have a correct way. So I guess where I'm getting to, or what I'm thinking about now, is when you ask, what is the point of this? You are indirectly asking, what is the correct way to do this to see a successful and see a successful result in a picture that you've created. And if you're looking for a successful result in a picture, then we're not being ecologically valid, because we're not looking at perceiving, we are looking at a snapshot of success. So what is the point? I don't think is a bad question, but I think it's a linearly directed question, because point suggests snapshot. So how do we then rephrase that question to be more ecologically valid and more potentially effective? I don't know. That's what I'm going to think more on now.
How do we use this in this? I suppose it's constraint, adding a constraint.
What do you mean?
How
Everything's a
could we do
constraint.
this?
What's the point of the constraint?
I suppose learning, but then there's still that measure on it.
What is the point? I think my answer right now would be, it's to help explore the education of intention and attention of the educator in varying environments when they are educating. But I say educating with an asterisk on there because I think we are always educating, because we are always coordinating and communicating with other individuals. So I don't. This is where I get a little bit confused as to how I would communicate this, because it's okay, we're exploring this for coaching, we're exploring this for teaching, we're exploring this for parenting. No, we're exploring this for experiences. Because I don't want to grab my measuring stick and dump it on a social construct that we've created through language. Coaching. You can use this for coaching. You can use this for everything. Because it's a way of describing behavior, perceiving behavior. It's everything. So what is the point? To expose us to attractor landscapes of exploring intention and attention of our behavior, which is what everything is.
Yeah.
So how do you use it? That's the question.
So
How do
is
you
there
use
a
it?
point? No.
Yes. Yes, there is a point. The point is if you make a snapshot. It's the same as technique. Is there a best technique? Yes, if you take a snapshot. So when people ask, is there a point? Is there a point to this? Well, yeah, there is. If you take a snapshot and you want to look at the most successful way that you could have coached that individual in that context, in that environment, then yes, you have a point. This would be the point. But that point is going to be different in the next 2 seconds.
Yeah.
So that point isn't relevant. Well, it's not relevant, but it's less relevant than the exploration of the dynamic attractor landscapes that we are exploring for intention and attention, which means that the conversations can't have an end, can't finish, can't stop, unless you want to have a point, an end point, a goal, a thing to do, which when you look at missions, that's what most of them are, they're end points. This is how you do this thing. And so there is a best technique, there is a point. But it does bring it into light. Or it does. How would you explain that? My attention is attracted to the usability of the information. Similar with haptic perception, usability of a tool, usability of the words. What is the usability of those words? Maybe that is what conversations are. Educating. And so what I'm thinking about at the moment is when we talk about perceiving, in the video, I talk about perceiving through the visual system, through the auditory system, and through the haptic system. And the mind's eye, as it were, that's described in cognitive psychology is talking about our understanding of the world. And maybe there is how would I describe it? A linguistic understanding, a linguistic perception, because vibrations are auditory, but linguistic perception, because when we think in our mind's eye, we're thinking through language. So maybe we have a linguistic perception, and we are educating our linguistic perception of our experiences. Maybe the linguistic perception is the meanings, the affordances we perceive through language, through words. So when we have different meanings of words, that's our linguistic perception. I just came up with that. I don't know if that's a load of BS.
No, it sounds.
But that to me,
It feels as accurate as we're gonna get.
when you look at comparing organisms, there is an obvious difference. Cognitive psychology would suggest that it's because of the mental models, the representations. What is mental models? Mental models are visual snapshots in our brain. But if it's linguistic perception, well, an animal's linguistic perception will be different from ours because we have words. Animals have also words, but they are different. They are more constrained because we have varying linguistics, as in languages, words that have different structure. And the structure of those words, the structured information, can be perceived differently. So the invariance of the vibrations the way that we see. So people being colorblind, that's a different constraint, biological constraint to the visual perception. But we are perceiving organisms, so it's part of vision. And it's similar, and it would be similar with languages. So if you're speaking Chinese or Japanese or French or Spanish, there are differences. There are, I wouldn't say biological differences, but there are certainly differences in the way that you are perceiving the information, the vibrations. I would need to have a look at the ecological studies of linguistics, but I feel like there is a linguistic perception, and
Would it even be cultural?
that's cultural constraints. That would be a cultural
Mm.
constraint on what we are perceiving.
Mm.
I'm just thinking
Because
because
is language culture? Well, I suppose it is all culture. Think about it.
culture is a social construct that we have created
Yeah,
through geography. So
yeah,
yes, culture is going to be a construct because culture is part of the ecological niche,
yeah,
if not the entire ecological niche. So it's certainly a constraint. But
yeah,
if we're looking at linguistics as perceiving, I'm stepping out of traditional senses, biological senses, because proprioception has been argued to be another sense to haptic. But ecologically speaking, proprioception is just haptic perception. And
yeah,
ecological optics, ecological acoustics, ecological haptics are the three senses that we talk about ecologically,
yeah.
rather than touch, because taste is, I think, ecological haptics. I think, but I'm not sure. Because when you think about touch, the usability of the tool, the it, uh, ellipsoids around the joints, because proprioception, you can feel something is further to the left or further to the right, because it's a movement tensor at the joint. So if something is moving to the left, then you feel your arm is to the left. It's not you're feeling your arm is to the left, it's you're feeling the entire object at that joint is to the left. And when I think about taste, chemicals are involved. What ecological taste looks like, I think, or how I would explain ecological taste, I think, would be through ecological. I say ecological haptics, but as I'm thinking about tensor movements, that's not accurate because there are chemicals involved. Because taste is the touch, so there would be haptics involved because we are perceiving organisms. So ecological taste would be chemical detection through the tongue, but can you detect chemicals through the nose? Yes. So do we taste through our nose? I would argue yes.
Same.
Yeah. Excuse me. Going back to language.
Whoop, whoop,
Yeah.
whoop, whoop. Oh
Yeah.
wait.
Yeah. Yeah. Gonna have to put a pin in that. I'm gonna have to think about ecological taste at some point. But yeah, so ecological language would help explain the struggles of communicating with other individuals because they're going to have different meanings of different words or different meanings of the same words. And the degrees of freedom will be different as well, which
Mm.
obviously helps with education, attention, intention. So I guess coming back to the original question we started with, how do you use the approach? How do you benefit from? What's the point of? Why do we talk about? Etc. 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 Exploration
Yeah.
is how I would explain that. Why do we talk? Constraint. Well, it's designed practice. It's practice design. Yeah, I guess the question actually is why do you practice? Why are you adding in the constraints of your practice? Because your practice, in essence, is your experiences. Practice design is constraining your experiences towards a directed behavior or directing for emergent behaviors. So what is the point of action? To direct yourself towards potentially emergent behaviors. And those emergent behaviors can emerge throughout varying timescales. So the answer of why you would go into a conversation is because you are looking for goal-directed behaviors in your specific environments in the future to allow for more emergent be detected because you're educating your attention.
Yes. Yes.
So the conversation, you are educating your attention of specifying information that you may be perceiving, but your attention isn't educated towards those specifying pieces of information. So you are deliberately practicing in an environment where other individuals are focusing your attention, they are guiding attention towards specifying information.
Would it be constraining attention, probably?
Well, yeah. But that's everything is a constraint. So the design of practice uses constraints.
Yeah.
So yes, so we are in these conversations to constrain practice, our experience, designing practice, our experience, towards educating our attention. That's the goal-directed behavior is to guide our attention towards specifying information that other people are exposing us to through conversation. And as we develop our education of attention and potentially intention, we can calibrate our behaviors when we are coaching.
Yeah.
For me, that is a depth of understanding deeper than it was before. I don't know about you.
Yeah.
So how would you explain it, just so that you've done some verbal thinking?
Thank you. I think.
Therefore, I am.
Yeah. You're welcome. Yeah. I like that question. It's such a question because I'll go there. I'll go there. Transfer it. But as I was,
What question are we talking about?
I don't know all of them. Every single question that ever existed, all at once, at the same time.
Oh, that's easy.
Yeah, exactly.
Stop delaying it. Go.
So it was during the last kind of at the beginning of the week, where it was a little bit before all the madness happened of this week. I did notice, like, as I was asking the questions, that was one of the things as I'm having a conversation around the ecological approach and just challenging the assumptions that Aiden might have because of school and that constraint of we have working memory. I was like, and I remember him actually, why are you asking this? And often my response was because I'm intrigued, because I'm interested, because I want to know what you think. Because there is that interest in like his own understanding of the world that he's in. Because there is a difference, and that interests me. And it deepens my understanding of him and what he perceives in his environment, what his perceptions and what he is attuned to, because then it deepens that. Because then I can constrain the environment in a way that is goal directed towards the ecological approach, and just to kind of add in those constraints, add in, and also it's a good way of me because he. Unlike many adults who are just like, yeah, I don't get it, scary things, let's not talk about it. Aiden will and will share, like, it deepens my experience as well at the same time. So I think it is very much that sums up why, for me, it is exactly what you said, just in many, many more.
I don't know whether it's the same that I said. There's a lot of differences. I guess my question to follow that up with then is the conversations you're having with Aiden. How do you design those experiences? Because it's practice design.
Yeah, it's very short, very small. They're very short, like they are highly constrained to following. So often it's like, oh, I forgot. Okay, why have you forgotten? How have you forgotten? Like, what do you mean by you forgot? I usually constrain it with a question to see where things are.
So when you say short, are we talking time span?
Yes,
Okay.
and I suppose it's just little opportunities. I think that's the nice way, but little opportunities is kind of the description of it. So what do you think about this? I don't know. Okay, what could it be? Is often the kind of pattern that's used as there's at the moment the constraint I'm adding is moving away from having to be right
I would
because
say that's a constraint. I'd say that's a goal.
sorry, yeah, a goal directed behavior is giving him the opportunity to be wrong or to not have an answer. but still explore, but
Right.
still kind of like see what's possible. Because of course in school it's so highly constrained to there's a right and a wrong answer, etc., etc. And he brings that out of the school environment into everything. So I think the practice design is aimed at moving away from there is a binary, this is correct, this is wrong, and you have to have the correct answer or my answer, the answer that the instructor is giving. I think that is the design of the practice design I have now is just moving away from the right and the wrong. That's the goal directed behavior I'm constraining by giving him questions that don't have necessarily correct.
So the goal is for Aiden to explore attractor landscapes,
Basically, yeah.
to explore explanations of something.
Yeah.
Or
Of something of an I suppose to explore explanations of experience. So like his individual experience. So like what yeah.
so your practice design is directed at him exploring explanations of experiences and behaviors, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And do you impose constraints or because obviously, as you mentioned, there is a time constraint, but are you imposing that or is that an emergent property?
That's an emergent.
Okay. So if that's not a constraint, what are you doing? How are you designing the practice? How are you constraining the practice, if at all? Because by the sounds of it, you're just engaging with Aiden.
Yeah.
So the design of practice would be the language that you use, I think.
Yeah, I think yeah, it is yes. Because yeah, it is less time and more the language.
Because if you're using language that is constraining, i.e., explicit instruction, you're right, I'm right, you're wrong, or whatever, that to me, the individual, or the yeah, I guess a task constraint from Newell's model, probably a task constraint because it's not environmental and it's certainly not individual. So yeah, the
Mm,
task constraint that you're adding through language. That's why I think ecological psychologists are so particular about language, is language can be constraining.
yeah.
So you're designing practice through ecological language to
Yes.
expose his, well, explanations and explorations of behavior and experiences.
Yeah. Because often and sometimes I approach him, but other times he approaches me and he starts asking questions.
That sounds like a psychologically safe environment when we're talking about coaching and education. If an individual is confident or has enough confidence, competence, connection, character, and autonomy in an environment, they are likely or more likely to ask questions.
Mm,
And that is something that I would love to see more of
mm.
in the coaching scenarios that I see. A lot of the time is the individual, well, it's the coach triggering the individual to discuss something rather than the individual going, have we thought about doing this? Coach, why can't we do this? Coach, can I do?
Yeah, I've been looking back over my coaching sessions. First thing I go is so what's up? That's my first question because yes, there are things that I could do and we could discuss and we could explore, but often it is there is something there, there is always something there. Let's see what emerges, and then that will take us and usually it does take us in that direction that I thought. Sometimes it goes in the opposite direction, and I'm like, oh cool, excellent, let's keep going. But that I enjoy because like literally the first thing I say when someone comes for the session, and I meet with them weekly, and then we have kind of conversations in between, but primarily it's on the weekly basis, and it's like, so what's up? Because otherwise yeah, and some people can't stand that, and some people love it. Oh, also womb that way, womb, yeah.
Yeah, I was about to say anything else you want to add. So.
Um, you'll find this funny. So I'm currently building my kind of coaching package, and I think you in particular will love this. It's called ground control.
Okay. Do you want to explain it for the audience? Because they might be listening and going, what?
So one of the things that keep emerging is the space analogy and the
Hmm.
university things, and I'm just like, yeah, that is. I am not thinking about that whenever I'm doing stuff. But if we are constraining, marketing is a constraint, so I need to constrain it. And so what do I want to emerge? And the spacey theme is kind of one of them. And so I've called it ground control. And also because there is some Gestalt kind of, I use
Yeah.
Gestalt techniques quite a lot. So ground, I was just like, oh, that feels way too good.
I
I was
can't
like,
pass that one
oh,
up.
oh. And then of course control, because often the people who come to me are feeling out of control in their business. They have so much going on, so they want. So I was just like ground control, and then it was like, great, thank you, David Bowie. And it literally took report to Major John because it was too funny, and I had to take advantage of that slight fun. So yes, I thought you'd get a kick out
Yes.
of that
Yes.
because
It's good.
space.
It's good as long as it's not a segmented. Okay, you're going to do one session. I'm going to give you all the answers.
No, no,
Good.
I'm doing it in 12-week kind of packages because it's a nice. There is some structure to the
There's
environment.
your measuring stick.
Yeah, it's a measuring stick.
I
Shtick.
need a ruler just to.
Yes, we should both get a ruler, so we just go stick.
Well, when you're talking, I'll be like with the measuring stick and the camera, just
Yeah.
measuring
So
stick.
there is that 12-week thing, but it is very much because as I was kind of designing this practice, I suppose it is practice design, isn't it? I think.
Mhm.
As I was designing this, I was like, okay, cool. So 12 weeks is like 3 months. It feels good. Like there is something there during that time where they feel they've made progress. Even if everything goes wrong,
Maybe.
they may not. We'll soon find out.
Non-obvious causality. They may have done
Of course.
something for 3 months and go, no, no change whatsoever. You're
Mm.
useless. And then 2 months later, because of non-obvious causes, they recognize something that's different because their education of attention has been calibrated due to various factors. And then they're like, oh shit, I can do this. So, right. I think that's it for us. So thanks for
Oh,
listening
yes. Yep.
and staying around with our rambles.
What are you naming this one?
Ecological linguistics. Yep. Bye.